For those of you who are somewhat surprised to have seen Meghan attending the Balenciaga show,
welcome back to our channel where we provide updates and undisclosed narratives on royal family. We provide you with the exciting news Buckingham Palace releases. Meghan Markle's sickest stunt yet sends Harry into an uncontrollable rage. The flashbulbs of Paris Fashion Week exploded like gunfire. The applause, a wave of validation. For Meghan Markle, this was not just an appearance, it was a carefully choreographed comeback, a spectacular resurrection after months of calculated silence. The setting was perfect. Paris, the city of light, glowed with the promise of couture, celebrity, and most importantly, control. An insider source reveals that every detail of her return was meticulously planned, a deliberate endeavor to construct a narrative of triumph. For Meghan,
well, obviously it's incredibly exciting, and yes, I think
every camera lens was a mirror, reflecting her own carefully crafted image. Radiant, redefined, reborn. Front row seats were not merely places to sit, they were thrones from which she surveyed her kingdom of relevance. To the world, it was a polished performance. The paparazzi framed her as a woman in command, every step intentional, every glance rehearsed.
Meghan Markle, because she's been mocked at Paris Fashion Week.
This was the Meghan brand in full motion, a masterclass in the art of turning exile into exclusivity. But behind the designer shades and practiced poses, a different story was unfolding. For Prince Harry, standing by her side, this was supposed to be a harmless obligation, just another public appearance in the gilded cage they now inhabited. He was the silent partner in this grand illusion, a supporting actor in a drama where he was no longer the lead. According to an individual with intimate knowledge, while Meghan fed on the energy of the crowd, Harry seemed haunted by it. The endless flashes were not a source of power, but a painful echo of a past he could never escape. An insider characterizes the atmosphere not as celebratory, but as tense. Behind the practiced smiles, a profound unease was settling in. The energy was electric, yes, but it was the low, dangerous hum of an impending storm. Those with intimate knowledge of the couple's dynamic saw not a power couple, but two individuals locked in a silent clash of wills, masquerading as a Parisian dream. Every shared glance, every carefully spaced step, was a move on a chessboard characterized by subtle movements and high stakes. She was orchestrating a clandestine revolution of her own image, and he was the reluctant collateral. The world saw a modern fairy tale continuing its next chapter. But those behind the palace walls, those who understand the unwritten rules of lineage, duty, and sacrifice, saw only the prelude to a war. The ground under the gilded cage of Paris had begun to tremble. The moment that sent a thunderclap through the British monarchy came not in a grand hall filled with dignitaries, but in a few casual, fleeting seconds of footage posted online for the world to see. It was presented as an influencer-style clip, harmless and staged. There she was, Meghan Markle, lounging in the back of a luxury car, feet propped up in a display of what seemed to be careless, modern ease. A filtered smile played on her lips, her phone in hand, capturing a moment of staged relaxation. But it was the location, the hallowed ground beneath the wheels of her car, that transformed this seemingly innocuous act into an undeniable declaration of war. The vehicle was gliding past the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. For those who remember, for those who still grieve, this is not just a place. It is a memorial, a wound, the very site where Diana, Princess of Wales, took her last breath in a storm of flashing lights and twisted metal. According to an individual with intimate knowledge, this was no accident, no terrible coincidence. This was choreography. A source reveals that the car's route was not random. It followed the same path Diana's did that fateful night. A macabre reenactment of her final journey, disguised as disposable content. For millions around the globe, the act was appallingly tone-deaf, a display of entitlement wrapped in the cloak of courtesy. But for those who guard the cherished icon and hallowed memory of Diana, it was something far darker. It was the ultimate desecration. A source close to the royal household characterized the move as a catastrophic misjudgment. a move that plunged the already embattled family into its most fundamental crisis yet. This footage wasn't just a video, it was a weapon. It was a deliberate invocation of tragedy, a calculated power grab designed to provoke, to shock, and to seize the narrative by any means necessary. It was a silent infiltration into the monarchy's most sacred sorrow, and the shock waves were just beginning to be felt. The monarchy's spirit was at stake. The fallout was not just immediate, it was ferocious. Witnesses with intimate knowledge of the events in Paris say, the moment Prince Harry saw the video, something inside him finally snapped. This was not the quiet, simmering frustration of past controversies. This was a ferocious eruption of fury, despair, and a profound sense of betrayal. According to a source close to the couple, the carefully constructed walls of his public composure, walls built over a lifetime of public constraint and private grief, crumbled into dust. He saw not an ill-advised social media post, but a direct and calculated assault on the most sacred and painful memory of his life. The source confirms that Harry, incandescent with rage, confronted her. He called the move cruel, attention-seeking, and a betrayal of everything Diana stood for. The words shattered the strained stillness between them. He accused her of turning his deepest trauma into a prop, of cynically using his mother's death as just another headline in her unwavering quest to chase relevance. For Harry, that tunnel is not a symbol. It is not a landmark. It is the darkest night of his life, a wound that has never fully healed, the epicenter of a sorrow that has defined him. And in that moment, seeing it callously exploited for clicks and commentary was a boundary he would not, and could not, allow to be crossed. There was no calm, carefully crafted palace statement. There was no strategic silence. There was only the raw, unfiltered rage of a son who felt his mother's memory had been violated all over again. A source reveals he was utterly broken by the casual cruelty of it all, shattered by the realization that even the most hallowed ground of his personal history was now just another set piece in her relentless brand-building exercise. This was a point of no return. The prince, who had defended her against the world, was now faced with a betrayal from within. A betrayal of Diana's bloodline that he could not ignore. The hidden royal war had just broken out into the open, behind the gilded doors of their five-star Parisian suite, safely away from the prying lenses of the world's press. The private argument erupted into a full-scale confrontation that left their teams stunned. Palace insiders characterized the scene not just as an argument, but as a point of no return. The raw, grief-stricken fury that had consumed Prince Harry quickly escalated into a fundamental battle over intent, loyalty, and the very meaning of legacy. He accused her of orchestrating a clandestine and emotionally manipulative stunt, a calculated act of sly manipulation that used his mother's death as currency for public attention. He saw it as a covert invasion of his most sacred emotional territory, but it was her alleged response, a chilling remark revealed by an insider, that truly shattered the strained stillness of the room. As Harry reportedly laid bare his pain, his sense of violation, she fired back with a cold, dismissive retort. "It's just a location," she allegedly said, her voice devoid of the empathy he so desperately needed. "It's not your property." Those words, a source close to the event says, changed everything. They landed not as a defense, but as a conclusive declaration. In that single, brutal sentence, she transformed his sacred ground into mere real estate. It was a proclamation that his grief was his own, separate from her ambition. This was no longer an argument about a video. This was about a gaping hole in empathy, a fundamental, unbridgeable disconnect in how they viewed the world. He saw a hallowed memory. She saw a backdrop. He saw a life defined by lineage, duty, and sacrifice. She saw an opportunity. In that moment, the carefully crafted illusion of a united front was obliterated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of a house divided. The conflict had reached its climax. As one insider whispered grimly after witnessing the aftermath, the message was severe and plain. "The sentence ends here," they said. Permanent ink marked the line. The gate was locked. Mere hours after the explosive confrontation that shattered the peace of their Parisian suite, Meghan Markle appeared front and center at the Balenciaga fashion show. An insider source describes this move not as a professional obligation, but as a deliberate and calculated act of defiance. The choice of brand was toxic, a calculated power grab designed to send a clear message. Balenciaga, still haunted by the specter of its child exploitation controversy, was an astonishingly poor choice for any public figure, let alone one who has meticulously built her global image on the protection of children and the empowerment of women. Critics immediately saw the move for what it was. This wasn't loyalty to a designer friend, this was hypocrisy in high definition. It was a stunning display of selective morality that stunned even her harshest detractors and sent shockwaves through the media. An individual with intimate knowledge of her operational strategy put it bluntly and chillingly. Every time her relevance fades, the source revealed, she reaches for something darker. Her appearance was an embrace of outrage as a tool for visibility, a clear signal that no controversy was too toxic to be weaponized. For Prince Harry, a man still reeling from what he saw as the cold-blooded desecration of his mother's memory, this was the final, crushing blow. Watching his wife, the mother of his children, align herself with a brand synonymous with a horrific scandal confirmed his worst fears. A source close to the prince says he was devastated, seeing it as irrefutable proof that in the empire of publicity she was so relentlessly building, nothing was sacred. Not his grief, not his mother's legacy, and certainly not the vulnerability of children. Any controversy could be used, any scandal leveraged, to keep the spotlight firmly fixed on her. The monarchy must survive us both, he is said to have thought. But in that moment, he wondered if it could survive this. When the initial shockwaves from the Paris incident began to fade, something far more calculated and disturbing started to surface. According to insider sources, this was not an isolated event but part of a well-established pattern. They began calling it the cycle, a sinister, predictable rhythm of shock, silence, and spotlight that has come to define Meghan's public life. Every controversy, every explosive headline, every carefully timed emotional outburst now appears to be a strategic prelude to a new announcement, a new Netflix deal, or a new photo opportunity. It is a deliberate endeavor to construct a brand built entirely on the currency of controversy. A source reveals that those inside the dwindling Sussex circle have watched with growing alarm as this pattern has intensified. They describe a disturbing methodology where Prince Harry's personal trauma consistently becomes her public talking point. His mother's sacred memory becomes her aesthetic. His family's deep historical pain is twisted into her narrative of personal empowerment and victimhood. The strategy, a palace insider states, is brutally simple. Turn every criticism into fuel and every public backlash into buzz. Seen through this cold, analytical lens, even the disastrous Balenciaga appearance was not a random misstep. A source with intimate knowledge confirms it was a calculated risk. The brand's name still stirs global outrage, but outrage equals visibility. And visibility, above all else, keeps her name in circulation. This is the anatomy of provocation. A machine that is fueled by real pain, protected by the glare of cameras, and designed for one purpose: to ensure that even in exile, she remains at the center of the conversation. The monarchy's spirit was at stake, not from an external threat, but from a deeply personal, internal corrosion. As the digital firestorm raged across social media, a voice from Meghan's own fractured past delivered a verdict that cut through the carefully constructed wall of PR spin like a blade. Her estranged sister, Samantha Markle, took to social media, not with an accusation, but with a question that echoed the public's growing horror. "Is it true," she posted, her words dripping with a cold, familial fury, "that my sister was doing selfies in the tunnel where Diana died? That's what I'm hearing." She then delivered the final, devastating blow. Now, that would be a really sick example of being a disaster tourist. The comment, coming not from a royal commentator or a faceless critic, but from her own blood, acted as a powerful and damning external validation for what millions were already whispering. It framed Meghan's actions not as a simple, tone-deaf mistake, but as a symptom of a deeper, more disturbing character trait. The term she used, disaster tourist, perfectly and brutally encapsulated the public's feeling that sacred, tragic ground had been treated as little more than a morbid photo op. It was a spectacular resurrection of the wicked stepsister trope, but this time, it felt chillingly authentic. For a public already questioning Meghan's motives, her own sister's condemnation was the smoking gun. It added a layer of profound familial betrayal to an already toxic narrative. The message was severe and plain. If her own family saw her this way, perhaps the public's worst fears were not an exaggeration. The comment reinforced the rapidly solidifying image of a woman completely detached from the emotional consequences of her actions, a ghost in her own castle of compassion, interested only in the reflection she could create. The House of Markle, much like the House of Windsor, was now irrevocably divided. To truly comprehend the depth of Prince Harry's incandescent rage, one must understand a fundamental truth. The Pont de l'Alma tunnel is more than a location. It is hallowed ground. For him, a source close to the prince confirms, it is the sacred epicenter of his life's greatest trauma, the precise spot on the globe where his world was irrevocably shattered. Friends who have known him for years say he never speaks of that night in historical terms. He describes it only as a wound, a gaping hole in the narrative of his life that has never truly closed. He is haunted, they say, by the ghost of a mother who desperately wanted peace and never found it, a woman hunted to her death by the very forces of celebrity and intrusion that his wife now seems to court. And yet, with a single, smiling, carefree video, that sacred space of private grief was transformed into a public backdrop for an influencer. It was a violation of the highest order. According to a palace insider, this act was seen by Harry as the ultimate betrayal, a stealthy infiltration into the one part of his soul he believed was completely off-limits. For years, he has had to endure the world picking at the scar. Every time Meghan wears Diana's jewelry for a high-profile event or strategically references her struggles to bolster her own narrative, the old wound is painfully prodded. But this was different. This was not a prod. This was ripping the wound wide open, televising the pain, and turning it into a shareable, monetizable moment. The act didn't just cause a crisis. It plunged the already embattled prince into his most fundamental and personal crisis yet. This was now a battle not for public opinion, but for the very soul of his mother's memory. It was a fight to protect the spirit of a cherished icon the world, and now his own wife, refused to let rest. The hallowed memory had been violated. And for Harry, that was an unforgivable sin. In the days that followed the explosive confrontation, the hidden royal war between them was not fought with words, but with a chilling, calculated, and very public distance. There was no shouting now, just an icy silence. And as anyone who has studied the monarchy knows, sometimes silence says more than rage ever could. The cameras, once her greatest allies, now became forensic tools, capturing the smallest moments that betrayed the fracture. The world watched as Meghan's practiced smile faded for a split second when Harry walked past her without a word. They saw his jaw tighten, a flare of displeasure, when her hand reached for his arm, only for him to subtly pull away, leaving her hand hovering in the empty, electrified air between them. Her face was a stone mask, but the rejection was absolute. Online, the atmosphere mirrored the on-camera tension. A global army of amateur investigators and royal watchers dissected their every move. Clips were slowed down, analyzed frame by frame, as self-proclaimed body language experts broke down their micro-expressions as if they were decoding a crime scene. A half-smirk from Meghan was presented as irrefutable proof of arrogance. A prolonged blink from Harry became a sign of deep-seated guilt and sorrow. Every fan edit, every slow-motion replay, made her look smaller, colder, and further from the woman she once pretended to be. This was no longer a marriage in crisis being played out behind closed doors. This was a public performance piece on the very nature of fracture. A source close to the couple describes it as the silent, brutal disassembly of a fairy tale, and the entire world had a front-row seat. They were no longer a couple. They were two separate, orbiting bodies, trapped in the same gravitational pull of scandal, pretending the cold void between them was still love. While Prince Harry disappeared from the public spotlight, choosing what a source calls quiet survival over continued confrontation, Meghan did the absolute opposite. She doubled down. Instead of addressing the ferocious backlash with a carefully worded apology or a period of reflective silence, she leaned directly into visibility. An insider source confirms she immediately began orchestrating a series of perfectly curated public appearances, a strategic campaign to regain control of the narrative. Photographed at high-profile charity luncheons, surrounded by a buzzing team of stylists and advisors, and giving carefully filtered interviews only to friendly media outlets, her message was severe and plain. She was not retreating. She was rewriting history in real time. For Meghan, an individual with intimate knowledge has said, "Control was never about the truth. It has always been about the narrative." Almost immediately, a steady stream of anonymous leaks began to pour out from her camp, all painting the same picture. She was the one who was misunderstood, misquoted, and misjudged. It was the oldest and most cynical play in the celebrity handbook, turning victimhood into a weapon of visibility. For weeks, the tabloids became her personal mirror, and with each passing day, every reflection she projected looked slightly more curated, slightly more sympathetic than the last. An insider source with knowledge of the palace's reaction characterized this flurry of activity as nothing short of a clandestine revolution. It was a brazen and deliberate attempt to seize control of the story, to erase the transgressions of the previous days, and to paint herself as the sole, unimpeachable arbiter of her own history, even if that history was only hours old. She was not just ignoring the crisis, she was surgically removing it from the record, one photo shoot at a time. In stark and telling contrast to Meghan's calculated campaign of relentless visibility, Prince Harry became a ghost in his own life. He vanished. Insiders described him as a man finally, and tragically, awakening to a devastating truth. Every apology he makes on her behalf becomes another headline she owns, and every passionate defense he offers becomes more fuel for her narrative machine. His pain is her product. He was seen only in quiet, unguarded moments at late-night dinners with trusted old friends, his shoulders visibly heavier than before. A source who saw him during this period says he was no longer angry. He was just exhausted, utterly broken. A source with intimate knowledge of his state of mind at the time described him with a profound sense of sorrow as a man trapped in a cycle he can no longer defend. It is a cruel paradox. Every time he tries to protect her from the storm, he loses another piece of himself, another piece of his own history. And every time he remains silent in the face of her provocations, he feeds the global perception that he condones her actions, making him complicit in the very acts that are destroying him. He was a prince in exile, not from a country or a crown, but from his own story. He was forced to stand by and watch in silence as his deepest, most personal pains were repackaged, monetized, and sold to the highest bidder by the very person he gave up everything to protect. It was a betrayal of a magnitude few could comprehend, a slow-motion hollowing out of a man who had already lost so much. He was a ghost in his own castle, haunted by a past he couldn't escape and a present he couldn't control. The incident in Paris was never just about a video. According to royal observers and palace insiders, it was the brazen culmination of a long and calculated campaign of what they now call legacy theft. This wasn't a single act of disrespect. It was the final move in a silent, strategic infiltration of Diana's memory. What may have once begun as a genuine admiration for the people's princess slowly, insidiously morphed into imitation, and has now concluded with outright appropriation. A source close to the royal household claims this is no longer about honoring the past. It is about controlling the narrative of that past for personal gain. Diana's legacy, once a powerful and globally recognized symbol of compassion, rebellion, and maternal love, has been systematically dismantled and converted into a series of brand assets for Meghan's use. Her priceless jewelry, imbued with deep personal history, is now worn for key photo ops to generate headlines. Her very real and public struggles are constantly referenced to build a false narrative of shared persecution and sisterhood. Her very essence, her spirit, has been hollowed out and monetized. An insider source confirms that this is what truly tears Harry apart. This is the source of his profound sense of sorrow. The world still looks at him and sees Diana's son, the living embodiment of her lineage. But he is a man trapped in a story where his mother's memory is no longer a source of comfort or strength, but a powerful tool in his wife's unwavering quest for power and relevance. It is a betrayal not just of a hallowed memory, but of the very foundation of his identity. It is a theft that has left a gaping hole in the narrative of his life, a void where his mother's legacy used to be. In the end, the Paris incident was not just a lapse in judgment. It was a perfect and unforgiving mirror of their fractured reality. In that single smiling video, the entire pathology of their public life was laid bare. Tragedy had been turned into optics. Grief had been turned into content. The grand fairy tale of a prince who escaped the gilded cage of the palace for a woman who promised him freedom had finally, irrevocably dissolved, leaving only the harsh, chaotic noise of two people trapped in a story they can no longer control or rewrite. An insider source close to the prince puts the fundamental conflict in the starkest possible terms. Prince Harry looks at the past and sees a sacred, unhealable wound. Meghan Markle looks at the very same story and sees a strategic, marketable opportunity. Between those two irreconcilable visions, love has quietly and tragically disappeared. It is no longer a marriage. It is, as one insider whispered with a chilling finality, a performance. The son has not avenged his mother. He has been forced to stand by and watch her hallowed legacy become just another form of currency in the ever-expanding empire of publicity. The price of his wife's perceived triumph is a monarchy, and a man more fragmented and susceptible than ever before. It has revealed a broken tomorrow, a future built not on the solid rock of heritage and duty, but on the unsteady, treacherous ground of borrowed pain. What remains of the crown is now more vulnerable than at any point in modern history. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for now.